This is the Instant Speed Podcast, episode number 52, and our guests today will be Tannon Grace, David Rood, and Brendan Patrick. We're going to talk about who is the best player in Flesh and Blood, as well as dig in a little bit into the brand new bans, erratas, and all of that wonderful stuff. And of course, this week's episode of Instant Speed is brought to you by Kayfabe Cards. KayfabeCards.com is the place to go for all your Flesh and Blood needs. It'll get shipped directly to your door, but it's not just Flesh and Blood. I know I myself love a variety of card games, and Kayfabe Cards has a slew of them. Pokemon, Magic, Flesh and Blood, obviously. You get your pick. So they will ship it right to your door if you go to www.kayfabecards.com, kayfabecards.com. Let's get to the facts, friends. Well, ban and restrictions have just dropped, and well, for CC, we all know that Oldham was kind of in the crosshairs, and what have we targeted? Pulse of Eisenloft, a wonderful card, is now gone. It is banned in Classic Constructed. How about Blitz? Well, Blitz got a sweeping blow, as it were, of bans and restrictions here, as Bloodsheath Skeleton is banned in Blitz. Mask of the Pouncing Lynx, banned in Blitz. Stormstriders are now suspended in Blitz. We're going to reevaluate that as time goes on. And finally, Sonata Arcanix is now legal again in Blitz. But there's more interesting little tidbits here, as we've seen a young Prism was out there blazing trails on the CC circuit and nationals. And well, frankly, we have now come to the time where we have to tell people that, CC is for adults. The kids' table is Blitz, apparently, and ultimately you have to use adult heroes only in CC. You cannot bring the younglings out to CC, and that is a Prism-related thing. So good to have clarification on that, I guess. Not finally, but I want to talk to you all about an upcoming wonderful little piece called the Goliath Gauntlet. You guys want some high-level Flesh and Blood? Well, the Goliath Gauntlet is going to keep you well in tune with the top players and content creators in the game. We've got multiple Pro Tour winners. We've got multiple national winners, calling winners. Wonderful people are going to be throwing down for cash prizes and pride in the Goliath Gauntlet. So you want to be tuned in right here to 983 Media, because they are going to be producing the whole show, and it is going to be beautiful. So keep your eyes and your ears peeled for that one. Finally, Realm Games Battle Hardened, taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of October. I will be there broadcasting. I will also be trying to play. Now, there's wonderful stuff you got to check out, so go to realmgamingnetwork.com, check out their Fall Brawl, which is a Battle Hardened, and get tuned in. Lots of cash and prizes available for that one. Friends, we have Tannon Grace, David Rood, and Brendan Patrick on the show. We're going to talk about the bans and errata, sure, but we want to dig into that unanswerable question: who is the greatest player in Flesh and Blood?
Greater Fist is going out for the block, which is going to stop the 2 damage off the blue Spellblade Assault.
What if we gathered 16 of the world's best Flesh and Blood players and put them head-to-head?
Belittle, creating a rune chant, attacking with overload, and that's game!
The handshake. Matthew Folks is your second Pro Tour champion.
16 of the world's toughest Flesh and Blood players duke it out for a $2,000 prize pool. All the action starts October 14th with a Friday night kickoff. Join Mitch Leslie, Tannon Grace, and Matt DeMarco for a Flesh and Blood event like no other. This is the Instant Speed Podcast. If you hear me chuckling, it's because this is like take 19 of trying to start the show with these 3 clown shoes. But we finally got things sorted. Again, a welcome trio of Flesh and Blood stars, I will say, reluctantly. No proxies here, friends. This is the real deal. And each one is bringing a unique perspective to the game of the Arsenal Pass podcast. We've got Brendan Patrick, who was just terrorized by a swarm of killer bees. Show us how you showed, show the world how you showed us your bee sting.
Oh my God. First of all, it's a wasp thing and they hurt a lot more. But no, you can't really see it. It's just all red and stuff. It's in my armpit right here. Yeah, literally got me
Can you show me which way the beach is? Like which way is it? Like, how is it
You're making me self-conscious. Stop.
No,
I actually got a wasp stick.
Brendan busts in here is like, guys, I was severely assaulted by a winged horned creature, and then he just busts it out. He's like, right there.
You know what's sad is like I took the Fab Fitness thing like real serious. I've been in the gym a lot lately, and I was like starting to feel myself a little bit. You know, you see in the first results, you see like some extra muscle that you haven't had and stuff, and it looks good. And then Brendan gets on here and he's like, check out my bee sting, and I'm like, I can never take my shirt off ever again.
Okay. Hey, thank you.
They hurt. They hurt for what it's worth. Not worth it.
They definitely do. We also have a retailer extraordinaire who just got a message straight from Wizard saying they've actually upped the price on the proxies. So, Dave, the retailer, a pro player, Dave Rood, welcome to the show, buddy. Again, always. Right. I needed you on here, and it was funny because when I did try to recruit you for this episode, you said, does anyone have a different take? Because I'm probably going to like eviscerate them. I said, yeah, absolutely. We got some good people here. So we're coming in with the real angry dad Quebecer, full force, which I love. It's my favorite thing. And of course, caster extraordinaire, Tannon Grace. Nice to see you, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm a little tired. Kind of like D-Rood. Neither one of us got a lot of sleep last night, so you might hear some angry old man energy from the two of us today.
Well, from him, he mentioned it was because of his child who he needs to rear properly. And you, literally, you just came off of saying you were feeling yourself. So we will leave that up to the imagination.
PG show. This is a family show. Let's keep it PG.
Absolutely. All right. We're going to get into a conversation about who the best player in the world is. Obviously, there's no set answer. This is all subjective. But before that, the bans and erratas were basically released upon the world yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And here we are on October 4th recording this with about 12 to 15 hours of digestion time for it. So we're going to go around the horn here for initial impressions on the bans and erratas. I'll start with you, Brendan. In terms of this, is it effective? What are your thoughts on the bans and erratas?
So I think the CC ban of Pulse Eisenloft is interesting, but at the same time, I kind of started to feel like Fi was the best deck anyway, and that Belittle is like one of the best cards that you can be playing in a class constructed list as well, especially with its effectiveness and the things like Icelander, which have creeped up in popularity. So I don't know how much of an impact Pulse Eisenloft will have. It turns Oakenold into effectively Raging Onslaught most of the time. So that's important. Definitely affects the late to end game that Oldhim did have as well. But yeah, I was surprised not to see some more aggressive cards banned. I felt like the meta was starting to feel pretty healthy. That being said, Fi was creeping up a bit in popularity, but at the same time, definitely could have, there could have been answers, and I thought we were in a good place. So I don't know if Pulse Eisenloft has that much impact on class constructed, but it is a significant ban for Oldhim. With that said, going into Blitz, obviously I'm devastated. My Stormstriders was suspended, so Kano effectively living legends. I think that banning is pretty out of touch with how the Wizard class actually functions in real Flesh and Blood and Flesh and Blood tournaments. I think that Wizard is a class that plays sort of below curve, but has multiplicative damage effects that punish opponents that don't respect it. I think that the conversion of the deck is very, very bad, and you could probably count on your hands the number of players that can effectively utilize that deck to make it a sort of S tier deck. That being said, it was going to be a good Blitz deck going into the Worlds format. Nevertheless, I do not think it was overpowered, and I think the banning was unnecessary, and I'm pretty disappointed in it. But may shake things up. There's just one thing about Wizards. I feel like there was a lot the people who are losing to Wizard or were really complaining about it. I feel like their decks were not respecting Wizard. Like if you were playing Blitz and you're playing an aggressive deck and you're losing to Wizard and you feel like there's not choices you can make. Most of the people that I played in the team tournament in Vegas and we're not playing things like Spell Void, right? And Spell Void is probably the most effective thing you can have in an aggressive deck against Kano, and people just didn't employ it because they didn't think Kano was enough of a threat. If more aggressive decks had added that in, it would have just further neutered Kano's ability to be effective in that format. And you have cards like Oasis Respite that came in that can be utilized by every single class. So I felt like that ban was really unnecessary. The rest of the bans, they're pretty good. But we'll have to see how Blitz shakes out. I think it's kind of a fundamentally crazy format, right? People think that talk about Wizard being unfair, but then there's Rhinar who just intimidates your hand and kills you on turn 0 sometimes, and that's just what Blitz is. So I was a bit surprised by that banning.
Yeah, the Pulse of Eisenloft kind of came out of nowhere, much like the Autumn's Touch. The Autumn's Touch ban came through, which was a very effective banning. It was a very, off the radar card that was like, okay, this does, we're not banning it because it's a powerful attack. We're banning it because what it does in terms of blocking and synergizing the deck and just being a lot of utility value. But for you, Dave, I know that when it comes to Wizard, you're not necessarily a Wizard player, but you're a Fi player. You kind of force it in all ways, shapes, and forms, but you've seen a lot of success with it. And this banning here, I know that you have been very adamant saying that Oldhim is by far just the top of the heap. Does this banning do enough for you? What are your thoughts on it?
As far as CC goes, I mean, I'm glad that they did something, even if it's. I would have liked to see more. And listen, I've been very vocal about why I think Oldhim is kind of oppressive right now, and I know Brendan thinks that Fi is getting better and things like that. But every event that I see, I'm seeing Oldhim just destroy everyone, and people are telling me that in testing they're beating good Oldhim player. But anytime I see Tarek, Isaac, Matt Rogers, like Christian Hawk went 12-0 in Swiss in Germany. He lost in top 4 to Icelander. I think maybe I didn't respect the Icelander deck that Michael Hamilton was playing enough, because it looks like it was starting to beat Oldhim a little bit. But I still don't believe that Fi was beating Oldhim consistently, because I'm not beating Isaac, I'm not beating Tarek, and maybe it's just me that's not good enough. But I think I'm decent at Fi. I think the Pulse ban is fine. I think the meta is going to change very little, and Oldhim is still, in my opinion, the best deck. The thing that's going to be interesting for World is, I think, while the Icelander deck that won US Nats was maybe beating Oldhim, I think they can adjust to try to fight that version of Icelander, and it's going to be interesting to see how what happens at Worlds. As far as Blitz goes, to touch on the banning, I think Lynx had to go. Is just way too good of an equipment. It could present like 5 or 6 damage and starts on board. People start with 20 life. It's way too much that you can present off of one card. As far as the Striders go, I agree with everything that Brendan said about Kano, but I think from everything I heard from people that I know who were testing Blitz heavily already, is that Icelander was by far the best deck. And I think basically Striders and Kano died for Icelander's sins. And this maybe was not the right card to ban in Blitz if they were trying to hit Icelander, but I think they were just worried about, listen, if we ban this, then we don't have to worry about if Kano's too good either. So I think if it wasn't for Icelander, they wouldn't have banned this, and Kano would still be like a viable deck in Blitz. But they were just like, we need to fix something before Icelander just dominates everyone.
When it comes to Kano and keeping Kano in check, a lot of it is like the power level, I think, has always been there, but it hasn't really blown away the field, because I think that a lot of what keeps it in check is just the skill ceiling on it. Like you can be really trash at it with the exact same deck. If you don't know what the hell you're doing, it takes a lot of work. And I know that people like yourself, Brendan, people like Majin Beke, Caleb Van Patten, like these are players who really put the work in to understand the intricacies of that deck. And I always felt like that in the wrong hands, it's just another deck. For you, Tannon, you don't get to play, you like myself, don't get to play as much as we would love to. We're always in the booth whenever the major tournaments are happening, and we love that, don't get me wrong, but we see the game from the perspective, from like the bird's eye view. For yourself and your opinion here of Pulse of Eisenloft, seeing so many games by so many different players, do you feel like this ban is effective, or do you think that they missed the mark on the ban?
So I'm going to start with Blitz for 2 seconds, because I
Sure.
have the least to say about that. I actually like Blitz as a format, always have. It just seems to me what they're doing is trying to open it up as much as possible for Worlds, and we'll see what happens there. Like I haven't even done my Blitz preparation for Worlds, for when we're calling that event. So I'm looking forward to what's going on. I haven't sat down and looked at the decision tree of what happens with all of the cards that are banned, because each one has ramifications down the line than just the exact card. Now, when it comes to CC, the first thing I say is, thank God they finally banned something out of Starvo. We've been waiting for them to ban Starvo for a long time to really neuter that back to normal. All jokes aside, I'm going to have a little bit of a harsher opinion than these two, while I do agree with everything they said. this feels like a half measure to me. This feels kind of like we felt like we needed to do something, even though they said I've heard some people talk about the over prevailing theory was nothing needed to happen. And I was kind of in that camp. I'm like, nothing needs, like quote unquote, needs to happen. But this sounds like, hey, we wanted to shake something up for Worlds. What's something we can do to shake this up? Now, I don't know if this is going to have the desired effect that they wanted. I'd have to like hear it directly from their mouth, like what we wanted to happen with this ban, and if this does accomplish that. Tark made a really good joke on our Discord today about the fact that he's like, this might actually make people play the game better by taking this card out of their deck. No longer are you going to get the free turn of attacking people because they're like, oh, I have this like, easy way to make my Oakenold really good, and so I'll take a bunch of damage this turn. I'll attack you back with an Oakenold, and then you didn't realize the tempo that you gained from that. Like you're not garnering an advantage from this other than now our life totals are lower, and my opponent's deck is better at racing than mine. The thing that I would say from here is, if you wanted to have a card to really affect the top decks and make the aggro decks a little bit better in this format, which is kind of down the line of what I'm taking from this, right? Like they wanted to maybe make Oldhim a little tiny bit worse and make the aggro decks a little tiny bit better. The card that I would think about to touch here, and I do worry about like how big of a, like how swathing of a effect this would have, is I would think about Channel Lake Frigid. Because like if you take that card or you affect that card out of Oldhim and out of Icelander, then it could possibly open up. So I see some shaking of head from Deerd over here. I think that maybe it's too much. Up. Yeah, maybe it's too much is the thing I worry about. But if you wanted to affect the top decks, the top two decks, in my opinion, are Oldhim and Icelander. And I do think Fi can keep up just because it punishes any off turn or any bad hand from your opponent. But like, I also don't think it's a bad thing to go into Worlds with 3 really playable, like, S tier decks, as the kids put it, because one of my favorite formats ever was the Starvo format, where we had 3 decks that were playable. So, and I do think maybe Channel Lake Frigid is half a step too far. So.
Well, I mean, do you want the aggro format back? I mean, I feel like we had that for 2 years, and it's just like you play like this dumbed down version of Flesh and Blood where nobody blocks, and it's like like in my opinion that version of Class Constructed just kind of blows. And like
there's always going to be a best deck. There's always going to be a race to make the biggest number, and you're incentivized not to block. It's just the way the game is now, and I mean, without drastic changes, we're going to have that.
Send it, Dave. Send it.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt Brendan. He was making a point.
Oh, my bad.
No, I mean that's pretty much it. It's like I feel like we've been there since Monarch, and it's been a breath of fresh air to have this new format where decks like Oldhim has been viable, but had the Prism Boogeyman there as well. I think that a format that is hyper Oldhim and is centered around fatigue is worse than a hyper aggressive format. But if we can get somewhere on the more defensive side, or just like where you're actually playing more Flesh and Blood, and I feel like that's where we've been in this recent format. I've really enjoyed it, and I think if you hit Channel Lake Frigid, you really punish these, like, you really kind of neuter decks like Oldhim and Icelander and their ability to fight against hyper aggressive decks. So that's why I would have been bummed to see that. But yeah, I don't want to go back to it. I don't want to immediately go back to this. We've got like the Little Briar, nobody blocks. We're playing Promise of Plenty. We've got the Fies all running around. It's like let's hang out in this sort of where we have decks like Icelander playable, and some people even taking Rhinar to national wins. Like it's a good spot, I think.
I think. I would have just banked around a seat. I think nobody's gonna defend the fact that this card is just way too good, and if it's not banned now, it's gonna get banned eventually. It's just like easily one of the most powerful cards ever printed. I didn't want to hit Icelander. I think like by hitting Channel Lake, you do hit Icelander pretty hard, and I think that if Oldhim got hit like with Crown of Seed, it would have let aggro build in a certain way that Icelander is still a deck. It's still a very good ice deck, but it's not like so dominant, because right now decks have to, like, you can't show up to Worlds and not be ready to beat Oldhim. So you have to build your deck in a certain way so that you can compete with Oldhim. And that really, like, it's basically, I mean, unless I'm wrong, it's really hard to build a deck to be able to compete with both of these at the same time. I kind of wish that Dromai was a better deck, and maybe people will break it in time for Worlds. But like in theory, like we need the Illusionist to be able to beat Oldhim or Guardian. And I kind of joked about him banning Scaletta, which I don't think, should have happened. But like we need a deck that can actually put pressure on Oldhim better than we have right now. And just to touch on Channel Lake, listen, Channel Lake's always one of the best cards against almost every deck I play. I just think it's one of the best design cards they've ever made. Like it's like the Talia of this game. It slows down aggro deck, it slows down combo decks, and it doesn't stick around forever. Like there's a real push pull on how much you overpitch to keep Channel Lake Frigid around and things like that. I just think it's one of the best design cards they've ever made, and I'd be really sad if it was banned.
I want to say one thing real quick. I just want to say, that's not me advocating to ban that card. I was saying if you wanted to affect the top 2 decks, like that was the one that came to mind that where you could affect both at the same time. Because I'm in the camp where I'm like, I think it's a step too far.
I just don't think Icelander is a problem.
It's a very unenviable position to be in to actually decide what goes, because for many, the concept of Oldhim being just I don't think there's any debate that Oldhim is the best deck in the format. I think the debate is what that margin is between Oldhim and everything else. And once that's sort of in flux and in everybody's mind and no one can agree on it, finding the right card to ban, because for some, like Tannon says, like just leave it be. Maybe people will adjust, will be able to sort of overcome. And in all honesty, there have been plenty of national tournaments, but everybody's kind of focusing within their own little micro metas of their region to figure out what they need to play against. And maybe whenever it comes down to Worlds, people will have a better understanding of what they need to play against. Finding the right, knob to turn is one thing, but finding how many notches are you going from 10 to 8, are you going from 10 to 9, and finding what that precise little piece is, because I feel like if you're banning Crown of Seeds, that's going from 10 to 2, but if you're banning something like Pulse of Eisenloft, it's a small little shift that maybe gives everybody else, it doesn't necessarily give everyone else an advantage, but it allows for some reliable turns, like a very strong card. It's a one of, and this is what's so fascinating to me. Yeah, it's a strong card, but it's a one of, and you might see it twice in a longer game, maybe 3 times if it goes the distance. I think that it's the right adjustment in terms of amplitude, but it might not be the right knob, and that's an analogy I hope you guys can kind of latch onto here. And are any last points between we move on to the main discussion of who the best player is, or is there any alternatives? I know, Tannon, you mentioned that perhaps Channel Lake Frigid was an idea. It might not have been ideal, but if you want to sort of tickle both of the top decks being like Icelander and Oldhim, that would be an option. Are there any other alternatives that you guys had in mind?
So for what it's worth, I 100% agree with the banning of Crown of Seas and Class Construct. And I think that they were motivated not to do that based off it being a legendary and people investing into it. Blitz is a different thing. And I think that they're willing and able have shown that they will ban legendaries in Blitz, but I do not think that they're willing to do it quite yet in Class Construct. And I think that card is actually going to plague us for a long time before it does eventually get banned or Oldhim rotates out. I think the
slope, right?
Yeah, you could have maybe also hit Belittle. Belittle, it's obviously it's very powerful. I don't know if it's too powerful, but I do think that it kind of adjusts some of the tenets of the games with how it fetches resources so efficiently. But that being said, if Oldhim is the best deck, then Belittle maybe doesn't need to go quite yet. But Crown of Seeds would have been a breath of fresh air for sure, in my opinion.
It's tough. I remember when these cards came out, I had Crown of Seeds as being one of the worst legendaries to pull out of the set. I had no clue of just how wrong I usually am. And in this case, boom. It would suck. And you know what? I want to just wheel back real quick here, because Austin Yost made a tweet suggesting that something like Tunic will eventually have to get addressed. And I know that there was a lot of people who were kind of pouncing on him for being ridiculous, but I think he has a point here when it comes down to that conversation of, if there's no standard rotation or there's no rotation of cards and there's no retirement necessarily like a weapon would be, like Rosetta Thorn, everybody's just waiting for Briar to pass, so Rosetta Thorn's kind of out of the picture. Do you think that there is a looming conversation that's sort of haunting LSS right now regarding something like Tunic, or is it a situation where it's like, this is the generic equipment, this is like the GOAT, and if you're not going to play it, it's because you have a utility piece that for a particular matchup or something that's specific to a particular hero? What are your thoughts on that? We'll start with you, Dave.
You can't ban Tunic. Come on. It's the most iconic card in the game. I don't think it's oppressive in any way. It's been relegated to a sideboard card a lot of times. Like how many decks actually start Tunic as like their main equipment? I think it's also whenever they introduce a new hero, if they didn't print a legendary chess piece, that's the one that people get to use until they get printed a card that will be better. But like almost every hero eventually gets something that's better than Tunic, and I don't know. To me, you just can't ban the most iconic card in the game. Like that's just like it would have to be so unbelievably oppressive for it to get banned. Like whenever a new player starts playing the game, they come to the store and they're like, yeah, I'm looking at things. I don't know what I should buy first. I'm not sure what deck I should play. And then everybody tells them like, you get a Tunic. And yeah, maybe that's an issue that, everybody needs a Tunic to play the game, but like just keep reprinting it and keep it cheap. And, it's a fun card. It's a nice looking card. And I don't think it's oppressive.
Tannon?
I changed my mind after hearing D-Rood talk. Because like, Yosa talked about it. And I almost brought it up and he said, there's anything you're going to change. And it's not that I want to ban Tunic. It's just eventually I want to like living legend Tunic. I want to like eventually be like, let's get past this. But I think D-Rood made the most important point here. And it's very, very good is every single time a new hero is printed, if it doesn't have a good chess piece, like it's just at a huge disadvantage if you don't have Tunic. Like you can't actually compete with some of these other heroes that just have like a good legendary chess piece, and you get your like one legendary, piece from your set generally. You usually get about one, and like you want the new heroes to be playable, right? Like we've seen that being a thing lately. Like all the sets, there's a reason why a lot of these cards are super pushed when they first come out is they want the hero to be playable immediately in Classic Constructed and stuff. So I'm wavering stance of eventually probably needs to happen to it. Just right now, like, if we're still doing tours in 3 years, which God, I hope so. Please let us, let this game, continue. Not that I think it won't, but yeah, some breath of fresh air might be nice, but like, let's just see what happens. Maybe they print another good generic legendary chess piece. So.
It's going to get living legend eventually. Like it's just part of it. Right? Just has to like Skullcat did, right? Like they just eventually print either like class specific headpiece or a better generic one. Let's just, to me, let's just enjoy it while we can.
Brandon?
Yeah, I think it gets phased out by class-specific equipment in supplemental sets like Dynasty or Crucible of War. That being said, I also don't think you need Tunic. Let's say your hero, your class, doesn't have a class-specific piece of equipment for your test. I don't think that Tunic is actually necessary to compete. I think that Tunic is often overrated. You have cards like Heart and Crosstrap, which is very effective, 2 resources, which you can get. And if we're looking at a more aggressive format, that can be a better rate. And you have the new card at the dual box. It's like Blossom of Spring or something, which is effectively a Tunic. And, what we saw in these last formats, which are like 3 to 4 turn games effectively. So I felt like you didn't really need a Tunic to compete. What kind of put Tunic over the edge, especially if you were like on the play or something, was the 1 defense value. I felt like you usually wouldn't get 2 activations out of it anyway. So I don't think it's oppressive.
All right. I like it. All right. So the main piece here, we've done the vegetables, the potatoes. We're hitting the main chunk of meat here, which is who is the best player in the game right now. Everybody has an opinion, and we're right off of national season. I think this is a good time to just sort of visit this topic, which has essentially littered Twitter for a while, and everybody has an opinion. There's polls, there's all kinds of stuff out there. I ran a poll in which it was myself, Tannon Grace, Brendan Patrick, and Nick Bolas, who opened a cold foil Heart of Fyendal at Nationals. I won that poll, so I think that is the most scientific and reliable information that we could possibly hope for here. But before we get into names, I want to ask you about criteria. What factors in to consideration when you're evaluating who the best player in the world is? There's so many metrics out there. There's ELO, there's wins, top 8s, appearances, things like that. I want to go around the horn and ask you all what you think those criteria are when considering it. And then after that, we'll talk about specific names. I'll start with you, Brendan. When it comes to evaluating who the best in the game is, what are you looking at?
Results, consistency, macro play, which is things like game plans, being able to dynamically adjust game plans on the fly based on what the opponent is doing. Micro play, playing hand-to-hand, receiving the most value you can, which kind of ties directly into limited play. Specialization, they specialize in a class. Can they play a wide breadth of classes? Are they good at everything? And yeah, I guess to an extent, because it's relevant in this conversation, is when did they start playing the game? You know, what does their career look like? And I think that there's a player out there whose career has just been um, pretty unfathomable for how successful he's been in a very short period of time. So
Brody? Is
those are
it
some of
Brody?
the- It's definitely it's not going to be Brody this time. Brody's a local to me, by the way.
Yeah, like when I had my first conversation with Brody, and he's just like, "Yeah, I started playing like 3 months ago." I'm like, "Dude, okay, relax." And you, yeah, just I got 20 years on you, kid. Like, stop making me look terrible. Dave, you know, metrics and criteria for evaluating the best.
Yeah, I think this game's pretty young. I kind of like when people are like asking who is the best player right now, which is kind of where I'm going from. I kind of look at this in the perspective of pro play is a pretty young. You know, there's been 2 pro tours. There's been like a year and a half of callings and things like that. I know there was like smaller callings before that. I don't want to ignore those also, but I kind of feel like right now is kind of like the pro era, and this is where the skill testing really matters. To me, it feels more like I wish they had like an award, and maybe they should have an award for player of the year, like other card games have had before. Then we could have, rookie of the year and marginalized person of the year and things like that, so that we could have, build a narrative and be like, this is the defending player of the year, or this is the rookie of the year, and they get, this prize cards or things like that. But as far as best player in the world, I think you have to look at results of big events where people have skill tested against each other coming from everywhere in the world. And to me, that means the Pro Tours, the eventual World Championship, and things like that.
Tannon, my man Tannon. You've been around the competitive card world for a long time. You've been mired in it. You've been very successful in it as well. You know what it takes to finish, I'll say second, but you've been at the table playing against.
Wow.
This is your daily dig or your weekly dig at Tannon Grace. There has to be one per episode. This is it, and you're here, and I love you, and you know I love you because I tell you I love you regularly. However, you have been on the pro circuit for a long time. Your record is incredible. You know what it takes to be a winner. What does the best in the world need to reflect in your eyes?
Real quick before we get into the my exact stuff on that, it's interesting to have this panel and bring that up because not only the jokes about me being second place, but it's funny because you kind of overlook Brendan when you do it, and he gets to have oh nice, I don't get brought up for this, but then that means he finishes second place in the second place conversation, which is not even.
I'm a commentator, sir. Can you?
Oh, I apologize. But I was gonna say, is that second square? Does that make it worse? Does that make it better? I don't know. That's for people at home to decide.
Your medal is the most silver. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Who is the most exactly? Then I'm virtually sitting next to a Pro Tour champion right now as well. Like for people at home that don't know, D-Rood is a Magic the Gathering Pro Tour champion and, quite a littered pro career of his own. At home, mine was during the era where we were on Twitch. Like D-Rood was right before Twitch. So, if Twitch existed at his time, he would be a much bigger name than I am and stuff like that. But there's 2 things and they both hit on it way better than I could ever do here. Like number 1, who's the best player in the world right now, right? Like who's got the best results in the last year, whatever defining amount of time. It doesn't need to be literally 365 days or whatever, right? Who's had the best results recently? What have you done for me lately? Who do you think is like the actual best player at playing the game? Someone has to play a game of flesh and blood for your life. Like if they lose, you lose your life. Like who are you picking? Because like it might be different than who people think are the best player in the world right now. And then you have the conversation, and like I know the game is relatively young. It really is. Like D-Rood made a really good point there. But we do have to have like the GOAT conversation, right? Like who's the best player of all time? Because I think there's an unquestionable like player who ascends to the top of like who is the most meaningful and best player in the history of the game. And they're probably not. It's hard to say. It's hard to say if they're in the conversation for top 3 or top 5 best players in the world right this minute. And I think they are. But they are undeniably the best player in the history of the game. But a lot of that comes from before what I like to call like the heyday of, competitive play in Flesh and Blood. Because starting with this year, I think is the real, or let's say Vegas, starting with Vegas at the end of last year, is probably the real start of competitive Flesh and Blood, and that's taking nothing from what came before. But I mean, just look at the size of the fields and the skill of the overall player over the last year. It has grown at an exponential rate, and I think that's where you really have to start judging.
Yeah, there needs to be a differentiation as well of who, is the overall GOAT, like you're saying, and who is the best player right now. Because it's on any given day, to use a sports analogy, you can be like, well, I don't know, is Noah Syndergaard the best pitcher in the game, or is it,
he was never the best pitcher in
well,
the game.
that's what I'm saying. But like, if he has a good month, is he like Alek Manoah?
Yeah, sure.
Is Alek Manoah the best pitcher in the game, or is it Clayton Kershaw? But are you looking at the body of work, or are you looking at a snapshot? And that's, I think, what we also need to differentiate, because when you're talking about the GOATs of all time, the name that comes to mind for me is someone like Matt Rogers. And
yeah, I mean, he's just the GOAT. Like,
right. And I think that, but you're like you mentioned, Tannon, that's because we're looking at a body of work. We're looking at a 2-year body of work. But if we're taking a snapshot of, let's say the past 6 months, we'll go around the horn again here. Brendan, who, in your opinion, is the best player right now?
So I think there's only 2 serious answers, 2 people in contention. It's Pablo Pintor and Michael Hamilton. Pablo Pintor, amazing results at the highest level of competitive play. Won a Pro Tour, top 8 at a Pro Tour. How do you argue that statistically? Michael Hamilton, on the other hand, every single event he's gone to, every weekend he's played Flesh and Blood, he has ended with a PTI. The dude is amazingly consistent. And for Michael Hamilton, I go off my personal experience as well. I played a lot of the quote-unquote best players in the game. And they all feel like, you're swimming in the kiddie pool. You can touch the bottom. It feels good. You feel comfortable. You're playing Flesh and Blood. Michael Hamilton drags you to the deep end and just drowns you. It feels different. He is so hyper aware and so good at his macro game plans and his micro evaluation of the sort of value of Flesh and Blood that it's just, he's a machine, and it is genuinely different than playing anybody else. So for me, that's why Michael Hamilton is the best player in the world for me, because I do have personal experience playing against him. But I think Pablo Pintor, I have been able to play against him. I've heard very good things, and his results really speak for himself. So I would err on Michael Hamilton, but Pablo's close behind, and I think that the World Championships is going to just decide that. One thing, though, I don't think Matt Rogers is the GOAT. And I like Matt Rogers, and he's been around for a long time, and he's been very successful. But, I mean, that's a different era of Flesh and Blood. And I have I'm a finalist in one of those callings. Like, I played in those callings. Me and Sasha Markovic, Sasha ended up winning the first constructed calling. Like, I played in those times. And they were not like these times at all. It wasn't easy by any stretch, because everybody was new, but it was not like it is now, especially with Talishar coming out, and now people are practicing online, getting more games of Flesh and Blood in than they ever have. It's a different era of Flesh and Blood. And I think the GOAT, like the question of who the GOAT is, far from secured. And even if we looked at the entire body of work, I would still put Michael Hamilton and Pablo Pintor far ahead of Matt Rogers at this point.
It's an interesting take here. First of all, when you mentioned that Michael Hamilton is a machine, I tend to agree. But the scariest machines in every sci-fi movie I've ever watched were the ones that learn and adapt and improve upon themselves. And that feels like he's that kind of AI that they make movies of and sequels of, like that's the kind of dude that he is, and he's not going away, which is the most terrifying aspect. But, just to sort of dig into your Matt Rogers is not the GOAT conversation, I don't necessarily think that your arguments are wrong, but when you're saying like, oh, he had a lot of success early on, he also just won his nationals, right? So it's also sustained. And Matt Rogers, to me, whenever I speak to him, he's somebody who always tells me that he wishes he had more time to be competitive. And not to take away from everyone else, I just feel like if Matt Rogers was just focused on competitive play, that he would probably be up there as well. But again, Pablo Pintor and Michael Hamilton are easily 1 and 2, if not top 3 in my books as well. Dave, you have when I approached you with this conversation, you said people better show up with some interesting answers, and I want to hear yours.
I mean, I was pretty sure Brendan was going to say Michael Hamilton. I can respect that opinion. I do think they're very close. I think Pablo Pintor is like on another level compared to Michael Hamilton's finishes. And I want to say finishes and be clear. Pro Tours to me is what matters the most. That's where the entire world comes together to compete at the highest level. And, both tournaments they've played, Pablo finished higher than he did, and not by, people were saying, oh, he made top 16, which are obviously really good finishes. But people are like, oh, he was just one win away from top 8. Yeah, you have to win 3 more to win a Pro Tour, and those are the hardest rounds to win. I just think Brendan touched on something that basically is why I'm so vocal about this conversation, is that I've seen it happen in other games. And, he touches on, I have personal experience playing against Michael Hamilton. Like I want to make sure that Europeans, who are kicking our ass, by the way, compared to North America so far in 2 Pro Tours, get the respect that they deserve. When I was, doing well in Magic, there's a guy who won 7 Pro Tours, and people were still talking about how the American guy was probably better than him. And I want it to be on equal level, is that you want to say that you're the best in the world, like show me with result, and not just be like, oh, I'm playing against the top players in the US, and those are the ones that write articles, or the ones that go on podcasts like we do. Those are the ones that, kind of push the narratives a lot. And I think that Pablo's just killed it. Like, I watched him play in top 4 against Isaac, who at the time, I was pretty convinced was, if not the best player in the world, one in the conversation. And like, he played him, like, the game was unbelievable. If you rewatch that game, like, they both played really well. And I think there was like a minor mistake on Isaac's part, and Pablo captured on it and won. And it was like, I don't know. I just think we've seen a lot of Michael Hamilton because he's in North America, but I just want to make sure that, if we want to talk about him being the best player in the world, he has to actually, have better finishes than he does. And at both Pro Tours so far, he hasn't.
To Tannon, you've like you said, you've ride shotgun with me on a lot of these major matches. We've seen so many of these pro players, and a lot of times when it comes to people's opinions of who the best are, it's reviewing footage or whatnot, or some players like Brendan or Dave actually get to sit across from them and see it firsthand. You and I have that bird's eye view, like we mentioned. Who is your best player in the game right now?
So they both made really, really good points, right? Whether they're right or wrong, whether you agree or not at home. And, I think one of the better points that D-Rood brings up is the fact that, America does get kind of, we get a little extra, right? We're on stream a lot more. We get coverage a lot more. We're thrust into the spotlight. And for obvious reasons, we get the biggest tournaments, et cetera, et cetera. We get the biggest production value. That helps, kind of cloud your judgment. I don't know if you remember this, Flake, but we had like hot takes going into the first Pro Tour. And do you remember what my hot take was? I said that an American or even a North American would not win the tournament, and that Europe would show up. And I could not have even fathomed in my wildest dreams how right I was. And I didn't, and it's not me patting myself on the back. I'm just saying I wasn't even as right as I should have been, because Europe's kicking our ass. Like, that's just the way it is. In fact, it's probably going to be one of the narratives that I'm going to push during Worlds is an American going to, step up? Is Michael Hamilton going to step up? Is a North American going to step up? Does Tarek finally put up another really big finish? He did just win a Nationals, and we kind of skip over that because, we're talking about the best players in the world, right? To answer your question, is it Michael Hamilton? Is it Pablo Ventura is really the question. And for me, it's like 1A, 1B between the two of them right now. I do have Pablo slightly ahead of Michael Hamilton for a few reasons. But like, there's a few names that we didn't bring up. And, D-Rood mentioned one of them. I knew he would, because he and I both have the utmost respect for Isaac Crute. I think the guy is... Dude,
the guy haunts my freaking dreams. It is.
You joke about a machine. He is an actual machine.
He is T1000. Like with the Canadian conversion, he's like T1265. Like, that's what he is.
And if I had to have like a Mount Rushmore of 4 to 6 people, it's going to be Hamilton. It's going to be Pintor. It's going to be Crute. But then it's going to be Rogers, obviously. It's going to be Tarek, and then a name that, we kind of haven't mentioned and I think doesn't get enough respect in these conversations, and that's Matthew Folks, which is kind of crazy to think because he won a Pro Tour, right? But the guy's mind is on another level. It's the same thing as so, we talk about personal experience. You get this a little bit with Hamilton. You get this a lot with Tarek. And I haven't had a lot of time to really pick the brain of Isaac Crute because he's not very talkative. And I generally don't want to bother him too much. But when I talk to, Hamilton, when I talk to Tarek, when I talk to folks about Flesh and Blood, or even Magic, when I talk to these guys about Magic, because they're all old Magic heads, whenever I would talk to them about the game and they would tell me about stuff, I would have to really, really try very hard and pay a ton of attention to make sure I understood what they were saying. And to me, they were still speaking a different language. Like, if you could read their minds during a game, I don't think you'd understand half the stuff that's going on, because it would just be a different language. I think they're on a completely another level, see the game very differently. And so my answer to the question overall is, I think Pablo is 1A. I think Hamilton is 1B right now. But if I had to have someone play for my life now, I think I would pick Folks or Tar. And I maybe that's a crazy thing to say, but I think when it all comes down to, I think they might be the most like talented players. And I'm not taking anything away from anything, because I do think Hamilton is up there as well. And I only have the experience of Pintor from like the booth and from birding his matches. Like, whenever, a lot in Europe when you were either in France, I don't know if you noticed, I was like watching Pintor run to the top 8 whenever I was not in the booth, because I was like, this is insane that he's going to make another top 8. And I think you can't go wrong with any of those guys. Like, they're all just utterly absurd. But right now for me, it's Pablo Pintor.
It's funny you mentioned Isaac Cruden playing for your life, because whenever I get paired against them, which is freaking awesome.
It feels like it, right?
Yeah, it's the best, but it's definitely a feeling that I enjoy, is just seeing him with his cold, dead eyes just staring into my soul, already seeing the future. And when you're talking about Mount Rushmore, like a Mount Rushmore of players, and you mentioned Isaac, he already is that stone-faced killer, and that you probably is just, best, the absolute best compliment I ever got was at Canadian Nationals just a couple weeks ago, where I got paired against him. First of all, hilarious story, because we're at the pod. I was in one of the seats at the corner, and he was like 3 players to my left. I had no idea he was there. And we did all the drafting, and all the stuff is done. We registered the decks or whatever. I get up, and I hear somebody I feel somebody tap me on the shoulder. I turn around, and it's Crute, and he's like, "I'll see you in round 2." And I was like, "Oh my God." Just coming out of from under the bed to just destroy me. But when it comes, yeah.
I was going to say, so like there's a thing I wanted to add there too, real quick. And like, I have this pulled up on the other side, because like, with D-Root on the show, I knew that I needed to bring receipts as well for some of my arguments. And I do have up a leaderboard for rating for Classic Constructed, and Michael Hamilton is number 1. He's the only player over 1900, but surprisingly, I don't know why this is surprising to me, but the only person close to him at 1879 is Matthew Folks at number 2, and then Isaac Crute is number 3 at 1849. And then you go all the way down to 13th to get to Pablo Pintor. I don't know what happened with his elo here, but he's under 1800. And if you look at a few of the other players, it goes Hamilton, Folks, Crute. Rutowski is number 4, but he's coming off a very big finish. But he's one of those guys. He's just looking for one of those big, like really big finishes. Put the a trophy next to his name, because he's been doing really well. And you've also got like in here, another. If you've been around Magic, you've been around competitive card games. Like, this is another guy that's going to make a big name for himself here too. So there's this as well. There's a couple other players too. Like, a lot of us aren't talking about Michael Fang at all. Like, his name never gets mentioned, and I think that we should just not overlook him quite a bit, because like his results are also just absurd over the last year as well.
Yeah,
and he never gets mentioned.
Like, Fang's good.
I keep waiting. Sorry.
No, sorry. I was gonna say, like, Fang's good and whatever, but I mean, like, we're not discounting the fact that these are world-class players, but like, we're talking about the best here. So eventually there's going to be a cutoff, and some of the names that I want to throw out there, and Matt Folks is definitely one there, because it's not just about execution, it's also about innovation and design, and that's where I think Michael Hamilton also gets sort of a leg up as well, because of the decks that he's playing are just really unique in terms of that. But I want to throw some names out here, and I want to get your reaction. Well,
I'm waiting for this name.
It's not yours, if that's that's it.
No, I'm saying we've named all these people, and I thought that Tannon was going to, touch on it, but the name that never gets mentioned in these conversations, and his finishes are insane. I've seen him play, and he's in my opinion one of the best players right now, and I thought that's who Tannon was going to put on his Mount Rushmore, but I don't want to butcher his name, and it's Bartosz Zemba.
Oh, Bartosz Zemba, of Poland.
Is very good, yeah.
Like,
I was going to bring
like
up the Polish stuff a lot by themselves. Have like this community that's
So he gets like almost no love, but he, his finishers are insane. I think he has a PT top 8 calling finalist. obviously Poland's like incredibly hard to do well in. It's by my account, it's per round the hardest nationals in the world, in my opinion. It's the hardest round by round event to get wins in. He's in the top 10 in both ELO and limited and in constructed, which is no small feat. I don't think he's on the level of Michael Hamilton and Pablo as far as finishes right now, but he never gets mentioned, and he has the finishes to be in this conversation above some of the names that, to be honest, I love Isaac and everything, but Barto's numbers are, on the same level as he is.
What about Yuki Lee Bender?
Absolutely. I think it's somebody, and just like you're not in the conversation for best player in the world, but you can't argue finishes. She's definitely someone to have a conversation about.
I like Yuki a lot. I don't think her finishes are quite there yet. She needs like more PT finishes. I want to hear about Brendan though. I feel like we've been hogging the mic and she's been sitting there waiting for to get back in this conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna go to Brendan because Brendan made a really good argument for Pablo and Michael, and I lean towards Michael on this one as well. But in terms of the periphery, and even let's factor in a little bit of bias here. Let's be real, because and I think we're coming to a realization here. And I know that Dave, you and I have spoken about this a lot. I speak about this with many people on the show, where we discussed the potency of like Canada as a pound for pound really strong nation when it comes to flesh and blood. US has exceptional players, obviously, but damn it, Poland is like on another freaking level. Pound for pound. I played in a armory in Warsaw, and they were telling me, they're like, "Oh, this is like one of 5 that we do a week. Like we basically hop from place to place, and they're small, but everybody there is an absolute assassin." So I think that we're finally coming off the whole North American bias when it comes to this, and realizing that the best players in the world are like Matt Folks in the UK, Pablo Pintor in Spain, Bartosz in Poland. And Brendan, for you, are there any other names that you're thinking about in terms of the best in the world? And has North American, this self-imposed supremacy kind of evaporated? Like, has that illusion just dissipated?
So I want to ask you a question to start this off. Do you remember that there was a calling in Poland? It was in Krakow, actually. Do you remember who won that?
It was a blitz. It was blitz, I believe. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it somebody from Asia?
No.
Oh,
it was
no.
Yanji Lee out of New York.
Yep.
Oh, gosh.
So
Okay.
these Polish armories being round for round. It's just a funny jab at Poland's supremacy, but we did go and take their trophy. Yeah, I do think that Europe is objectively the best region in the world right now. I also think that Pablo Pintor is probably closer to the objective best player in the world, based off Pro Tours kind of being the apex of competitive play. I side with Michael because of bias, because of personal experience, but I also think his consistency of results at extremely competitive events, whether they be callings or the national championships, have been very consistent. That's why his rating is so high. Actually, is because the only place he's really lost has been in Pro Tours. Isaac Krut, though. So we did a little podcast and we touched upon this best player in the world argument. And Isaac Krut we went through a lot of categories. And Isaac Krut took it from me as the most underrated player in the world. I call him the Where's Waldo of top 8 pictures, because he's always lurking somewhere in the background. He's got to pick him out. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's any other names that really come up as in contention if we want to really pick out the best player in the world. I think it's Michael Hamilton or it's Pablo Pintor, and we got to let Worlds decide from there. It's very likely that neither one of them will win, to be honest. But maybe we can settle the argument for kind of who finishes higher. Maybe Michael finally lives up to his name in top 8s at Worlds here, and Pablo doesn't, and that might get us closer to a reasonable argument. But I think that Pablo's finishes, you just can't argue with that, right?
Yeah,
top 8's Pro Tour.
The Where's Waldo description is very fitting. That's why when I was when I top 8'd with him at Harry Tarantula, I made sure that I lifted him up and carried him like a sack of potatoes. I'm like, here you go, buddy. This is the only time I will ever carry you in any way, shape, or form. The other question here, frankly, and I like what you're saying, but where you're mentioning, Brendan, that Worlds is going to be probably is just going to sort of hammer down people's opinion of who the best is. Because if Michael wins or Pablo wins, I don't think there's any debate of that one of those two will be the GOAT. But are there any players out there right now that if they win Worlds, they just end that debate and say it's me? Like if Matt Folks or Tarek win, is it just them?
Yeah, I think so. World is just such a big stage, right? And, it's the first World Championship. It's almost undeniable, especially if you're someone who has a track record of already winning. So if it's somebody who hasn't won a calling before, hasn't won a nationals, maybe won a bunch of RTNs and ProQuest and they win Worlds, then yeah, you could just put them up in contention where it's like, yeah, it's Michael, this person, or Pablo. But I think if it's, a player like Matthew Fox or like Tarek Patel or Matt Rogers, or I would say even Sasha Markovic, who's 2 times a calling and has top 8 at a Pro Tour and then goes into Worlds, like they probably can usurp them, like the current conversation, the best player in the world. If it's a quote unquote no name, and I mean that in the most respectful way possible, then I think they're in contention. But somebody who has a track record of already winning, if they win World Championships, I think that, yeah, I think we give them the title of best player in the world for the moment.
Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with that. I do think there's a lot of people who need more finishes than that. Like I think winning Worlds, I think Worlds is, to me, is on this about the same level as a Pro Tour. I don't see, like, I know there's more money and there's an extra format to practice for. I don't think the jump is that big. I think Pro Tours and calling are a huge difference. Like nationals are like a step below that, except for US Nats. I'd say like US Nats are like about on the calling level because of size and skill and things like that. So I do think nationals are like a significant level below calling, like below Pro Tours. So I gotta get like a little annoyed when people mention US Nats in the same vein as PTs. But yeah, I think World is going to be super interesting. There's a lot of really interesting narratives, and it's going to be a fun event. Definitely the cast, and if I wasn't playing in it, I'd be glued to my TV like I was for the second PT when I didn't go. So yeah, it's going to be a good time for sure.
How about you, Tannon? If there's one player that just takes it all, that it might usurp the Michael Hamilton, Pablo Pintor consensus.
Since we keep using this word, do they become the Kingslayer as well if they beat them in the final or whatever? But no, I don't have anything new to add here. I think they both just crush those answers. Yeah, like if one of the players with a track record wins this, they just immediately ascend to best player in the world. Or they even further the gap. If Hamilton or Pintor, if Pintor wins this, I don't think it's even arguable. And even if someone Hamilton wins the next Pro Tour, you're still going to have the argument. He's still going to be that far ahead. And I got to agree with D-Root here. It's practically another Pro Tour on in competitiveness for me.
I like that answer. I feel like there's very few. I feel like the gap for those top players is wide enough that if they top 8 but lose, they're still considered probably the best. It's just fascinating to me because this is the World Championships, where frankly the whole theme of this is to crown the best in the world, right? Wherein the debate is they were the best in the world at this tournament, maybe not at the game as a whole, even though it's 3 formats that are being represented. We're going to end the show on one more question that I want to go around the horn on. We'll start with you, Tannon, get you under the gun here. If there's a player that is threatening to have a good run in 2023 to be the best player in the world, if they have a great run in 2023, who is that player you feel has that capability, that potential?
I only name one.
You can name a few if you want. There's no.
I've got 2 that immediately come to mind. I can't pick which one between Folks and Kroot. I think they're the guys right on the cusp that if they put up another top 8 somewhere, another Pro Tour top 8 or another big win, that you just immediately have to start talking about them as the best in the world.
That's fair. Brendan?
Yeah, I think it's just Hamilton. He started in Tails, and he's honestly still pretty new to the game, so I think his 2023 is going to be really, really successful.
Doubling down on Hamilton. No one's saying Brody yet. I've got high hopes.
It
for
could
Brody.
be. I think Brody gets a lot of publicity because he's done so well and he's so young. But him versus Hamilton is just not even a conversation for me quite yet. And I've known Brody. He plays in my armories. He's a very good player, but he's got to show us a lot more to be in that conversation. And 2023, he'd have to win multiple Pro Tours, I think.
All right, Dave, if there's a player that's threatening to be at the end of 2023 to be in the conversation, who do you think that could be?
Christian Hawk. I think the guy's got an incredible background in card games. He's way better than me in Magic, that's for sure. And he's shown that he's transferred, like when he puts in the time in Flesh and Blood, like he went 12-0 in his nationals in Swiss. He's got a PT top 8, I think, in the second PT, and he's got like a lot of big finishes. The guy just knows how to win, and he's obviously really, really good. How much he cares about Flesh and Blood is going to be another question. It's the same question that comes with Matt Rogers and Tarek and people who have busy lives and things like that. I like this conversation. I think it's been a short period of time, and it's easy to get lost in the fact that the game's still young and one finish sways everything so far one way or another. I kind of wish that that LSS, like I said, had a Player of the Year award that they gave. I don't know, some sort of special go foiled or something, and like a plaque that says, to 2022 you were the best Player of the Year. Now let's start over for 2023. I think those narratives are always fun. And if you just I know like other card games have like put points to winning a calling or finishing high in a calling or PT, and you can actually, have a real race with points based on how many wins you got at PT and things like that. So yeah, hopefully they start doing that eventually, so we can move to a conversation from like who's the best player in history of the game to like just who's the best player this year.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys having this conversation again. There's no right or wrong answers. There's obviously...
Who you got, Flake?
Who do I have? Oh, you guys. As the best in the world, I am currently on the Michael Hamilton train. And I put a lot of that in the fact that deck design, innovation, reading the tournament meta beforehand and exploiting certain things. I feel like that's a skill in itself. Preparation, everything that leads up to round one, round one is a major factor. And I'm not saying that there's a lot of players out there who do not put in the work, but I just feel like Michael Hamilton is always the best prepared and the most innovative and the best player, or the player who's always most ready to adapt and turn things upside down, like playing Wounded Bull in Icelander. Obviously, that's so weird. It's much like Promise of Plenty and the Briar list and things like that. I think that these are elements that need to factor in, but there's a plethora of players that I would consider. It's like that whole thing, like, oh, my top 5 is like 17 people, like that's kind of that whole trope where players like Tarek Patel, Isaac Kroot, Matt Folks, these are players I've played against, talk with regularly, and just their understanding of the game is on another level. But also, I'm not a competitive player. I'm blown away when I play against someone like Brian Basoko, and he just decimates me because he's just an exquisite card player. Like when I play against U10 and then you just dummy me, and I'm like, okay, like these are just players that are great. But are they the best in the world? That conversation is so unique and subjective.
I am the best in the world, by the way.
Okay.
There's a reason why I stay in the booth. I have to give other people a chance.
That's a good, yes.
It's actually just a testament to how great I am as a person and how awesome I am that I allow other people to get second place as often as they do.
Oh, that is I'm going to steal that for my Tinder profile.
Sure. Sure. I'd swipe right on that.
Friends, I do sincerely appreciate the conversation. If you out there listening to this have your own opinion, please drop it in the comments and tell us how right or wrong we are, or, perhaps give Brendan some beekeeping advice, because he has been clearly...
It was a wasp.
It was a wasp. Come on, get it right.
They're way cooler.
One makes him sound way tougher, and that's what he's making sure of. He's like, I want to sound tougher here.
All right,
dude. Honestly, one hurts a lot more than the other.
What are they, like those African murder hornets or whatever? We'll just call them those. And just that's what it was. All right, friends. We'll start with you, Dave. Dave, where can people get your most delicious musings? Because you have been on a rampage lately, and it has been quite fun to watch.
You can find me at DRoodHT. I'm always open to, good conversation. I love the game. And sometimes it gets a little heated, but as long as you're not being disrespectful, I'm always open to engage with you and have honest conversations.
Perfect. And Brendan, you're going to be on the casting squad for Worlds. I'm super excited about this. You and I have casted together before, and I actually saved something for this particular moment. I don't know if you recall this.
Oh, I recall that. I already knew it was gonna be.
Yeah.
You should bring that to Ohio. It's what, like 2 weeks or something?
This has been in my wallet since Ohio. I am not getting rid of this because this means a lot to me. It was the first time that we had a wonderful moment. That wasn't in the bathroom, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, where
Ohio
can we?
Ohio is for lovers, right?
Is that what it's called? What a terrible tagline for a really mid city, mid state.
It's a song.
Yeah, hopefully people get that one. But go ahead.
For you, Brendan, where can we get you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Brendan APG. I co-host a podcast called Arsenal Pass. It is a podcast and a YouTube channel, so check us out. Mainly focused on the competitive side of the game. I'm also going to be starting up a petition to bring Stormstriders back into Blitz. Information will go out on my Twitter, and you can sign up, and we can try to make Blitz great again. But anyway, yeah.
I love it. The best line that I had. So I tweeted out today. I said, I love seeing people who have never touched Wizard and have never played Stormstriders complain about it in a format that they never liked anyways. And the response I got was from Yanji Lee saying, Wizard is the new grass.
Yeah.
Nobody's touched it. I was like, okay.
That's amazing.
It is good. It is good. How about you, Tannon?
You can find me on Twitter under the Tannon Grace, just so you don't get, maybe mixed up with the other Tannon Graces stuff in there. And then you'll see a decent bit or hear a decent bit more from me upcoming in Worlds with 2 of these clowns as well. And then D-Rood competing, also a clown. But you'll also find more of possibly all of us. We're working on some of that again. And, we have the official announcement and the roster's coming out soon of the Goliath Gauntlet that should be coming to YouTube very soon. And hopefully you get to watch and enjoy all of that.
It's going to be a
Not
good
me.
one.
No invite for me.
As I said, we're in the works with something with you. You're on a list.
Yeah.
So we'll see. You're on a list of some kind.
Yeah, we need someone to supply some of those wonderful, what are they called, proxy packs. Those are going to be the prize packs. Super valuable stuff. Friends, thank you so much for listening to the Instant Speed Podcast. This has been episode 52. Thanks to our sponsors, kayfabecards.com and BCW Supplies, and to all our patrons. If you're a patron of the show, you get a cool card back now on Talishar. Let's go show that bad boy off. Friends, you're not losing if you're learning. Keep playing the game. We'll catch you next time on ISP. Bye.
Well, I